All right, Steeler fans, it is Monday morning, which means it's time for the Monday morning conversation. I'm excited to have this guest on the show. I don't know if a lot of people realize this, SteelCurtainNetwork.com. It was this past offseason when the Steeler season ended. I put out a message to really anyone saying, if you would want to join the team, here's your opportunity. And he was one of the Chris Gillis, who's joining me today, was one of the first people to send me an email and say, I'd love to join the team. Brought him on as a writer, and he's doing a fantastic job. Chris, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you, Jeff. I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here.
I got to ask, how did you find our content? I'm always curious when I have someone that started off as someone who maybe listened or read the content. How did you find us?
So during I think the beginning of the last season, I just started finding more and more YouTube videos, just looking for Steelers content, and probably end up down a wormhole somehow. And then I came across you guys, and I love the things you were putting out, and I continue to listen.
All right, fantastic. So you should be familiar. Hopefully, you've listened to the Let's Ride podcast before. And before we get started with the talk about the Steelers, you have a very unique background. You have a track background. You ran for Baylor, Division I program, obviously. I'll let you speak on your own resume. So go ahead and tell the listeners what you have a background in terms of the track realm.
So I've always ran track my whole life. I was a high school All-American. I was a New Jersey Jumper of the Year, two-time state champion, which ended up getting me a scholarship to Baylor. So I moved to Texas from New Jersey, competed at Baylor. While I was there, I was a two-time All-American. I was a Big 12 champion in long jump, and I qualified for the Olympic trials in 2008, but couldn't compete due to injury, and then got into coaching from there.
That's awesome. That is fantastic. I mean, my gosh, you're a hell of an athlete. And I want to ask, when you watch these NFL athletes, and I'm going to say this because you quote tweeted a video the other day and I laughed out loud. It was a video of Jaden Daniels, the Washington Commanders quarterback, and he was doing some random. It seemed like just some random drills. Like he's doing the circle, and he's definitely. I don't know why a quarterback has to work on that, but he is. And I think your quote tweet said something along the lines of, is this really how he runs? Because his arms were flailing around. How critical are you when you're watching these guys going through some of their motions and things like that?
I try not to be with football because they do have to run different. They can't just open up and run like you would in track. But what he was doing, I have no idea. There's no way he could be coached to run like that. So I have no idea how that's effective, how somebody hasn't stopped him but I mean, he was a number 2 overall pick. So, I mean, he's doing something right.
I mean, he looked like he was getting chased. I mean, yes. that looks like if you were to go back, 30 years, my older brother chasing me around the yard, and I'm faster than him, so he can't catch me. But that's what it looked like with wild arms and stuff. Now, let's also translate that into some really intricate, detailed work. And the route god, I think that's what he calls himself. And George Pickens is working with him in terms of his route running. When you see someone like that and the specific nature of their steps and their body language, what's your takeaway from that type of training as well?
See, that's necessary because in football, you have to change direction so quick. And so I love what the route guy does is he, like you say, he's very detailed and he's getting into that lane of changing direction. His is all about sudden movement, stop and go, change directions. And that's something that we've seen that Pickens needs to work on. Once he gets going, I mean, he can fly, but at his size, his height, it's hard for him to change direction as fluid as some of these like little receivers. So if he's able to master that, man, he's going to be dangerous.
And Deontay Johnson's there working out with him at the same time. So there's
no
beef there between those guys. Now, last question about the track background before we move on to the Steelers 2024 roster is a question about the 40-yard dash time at the combine. Hey, this is really important for a lot of these players. Have you ever done any coaching as it pertains to helping people with their 40 time or just little things? Because some of these players, some of these top-end athletes that could go in the top 10 of the draft will actually get specific coaches. And I'm not even saying for the NFL combine, but have you ever helped anyone? And you coach, obviously, track, so you've helped athletes before. Is there a specific nature to that event and how important it is for these NFL players?
Yeah, the 40 is all about this. I mean, if you can get out, get a good start, I mean, that gets set up the rest of your 40. You don't need to be the fastest person, you have to be one of the most explosive. If you could just maintain that for over 30, 40 meters or yards in football, then
Yeah.
you can have a good 40 time.
It's crazy how everyone's so fascinated with the 40 time, yet some of the best 40 times don't translate to the football field. Most
Correct.
Steeler fans will say Dree Archer is like the prime example. The guy had a blazing 40 time and yet was smaller by nature and just never found his own niche within the Steelers organization or in the NFL because he never played anywhere else. Where do you put Calvin Austin on that chart? Do you think his speed from a straight line standpoint can actually translate to success in the NFL? We've seen him for a couple years, but not much.
It can. Just the most difficult thing about how the 40 can translate to NFL is how often are you just running a straight line at full speed? I mean, there's not too many times that's going to happen in the NFL.
Do you think track stars? Do you think it's an easy transition for someone? Rod Woodson, hell, that guy was almost an Olympian in track, and he had a Hall of Fame career. Do you think or let me ask you this from a track perspective: are there certain events that it's easier to translate into football, or do you think that it's just kind of like you either have it or you don't?
Maybe, Mike, because they're pretty athletic, but I mean, track and football, they're completely different worlds. So you can have a football player that's fast and be great, but pure track guy is hard to cross over to football.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the Steelers here. Let's go into the nitty gritty with this 2024 Pittsburgh Steelers team. The rookie minicamp was this past weekend, and the Steelers you're looking at the 2024 draft class. How many of those players do you think are week one starters for the Steelers in 2024?
I mean, you would have to put Zach Frazier, should definitely be a week one starter. Looking at how this rookie minicamp has been going, I see Fautanu has been on the right side. Mm-hmm. With him being on the right, I think that would make him a week starter. I feel like if he was on the left side, the Steelers don't like to throw rookies in there right away, and he'll have to beat out Dan Moore, who's been, starter. So it's not a position he's just going to give up easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say Fautanu and Frazier. And then Roman Wilson, since he's a receiver, it's easier to get them on the field in certain formations. So it's easier to get them on the field as starters than it would like a lineman or a position like that.
So in other words, you're thinking that it's definitely going to be Roman Wilson will be a contributor in week one, maybe not deemed a starter because obviously the wide receiver is different. If they come out with a one wide receiver, one running back, two tight end look, it's going to be different. But I see what you're saying. When you think about the draft class in and of itself, what was your favorite pick of the 7 drafted players?
I mean, it's hard not to pick any of those top 4. I mean, I fell in love with each pick as it went. But for me, it's between probably Peyton Wilson and Roman Wilson. But I think I will go with Roman Wilson because that was a position that we definitely needed. And he just reminds you of the type of receiver we wanted in the Steeler uniform. I mean, he's gritty. He's physical. He doesn't have any fear in him. He's not the biggest, but he loves to block. Like what do you say? No block, no rock. And he's the type of player we've been looking for.
Now to the antithesis of that, was there a pick that you were not sold on, but it's kind of grown on you after time has elapsed since the draft?
Oh, it's probably gonna be the same as everybody's. Mason McCormick. I mean, that was the one that when the initial pick was made, I was thinking there had to be a corner. I think TJ Tampa was still on the board when he was picked. I was thinking why didn't we go corner? But the more I look at it, the more I see the situation as Jane Daniels' contract is up after this year. And Say Malu, he's getting up in age. I mean, he's not old, but he's getting up there. So we're not exactly sure what that guard position is going to look like within the next 2 years. Then the pick made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about quarterback briefly. They've completely redone the quarterback room from 2023 to 2024. Regardless of who is quarterback 3, we know that Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are the top 2 vying for the starting position. My question is who do you think we assume that Russell Wilson, who's in pole position, as Mike Tomlin says, is going to start in week 1? But do you think that he finishes the season? Injuries could change things, but if everyone's healthy, do you think that Russell Wilson would also finish the season, or do you think the Steelers go with Justin Fields at some point?
I actually think Russell will finish the season. I mean, he's going to be put in an offense that fits him perfect, where it's run first, play action, throw the deep ball. you see the Steelers made a concentrated effort to revamp this offensive line. So he'll have maybe one of the best lines, hopefully, one of the best lines he's been behind. And he didn't look. I mean, he didn't get the best. How can I say? The best perception in Denver, but he wasn't terrible. He wasn't that bad, especially his last year. I mean, we would kill for 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions our last season.
Yeah. So, okay, put on your GM hat, be Omar Khan for a second. Let's say Russell Wilson has a season similar to the stat line that he had in Denver last year. What do you do at quarterback? Like, how do you handle that situation? What would you do if you were the GM?
Oh, man, this is probably why I'm not a GM. But that's tough because you want to see somebody like Fields be your future because he's almost 10 years younger. But you have a proven quarterback in Russ that you see his upside. He's a Super Bowl champion. He's been to the Super Bowl. I mean, he's done everything you want a quarterback to do in the NFL. I mean, he's been there, done that. I would like to sign Justin Fields this year before the season starts, if we can extend him. And then, because you never know what Russ is going to ask for when the season's over. If he does have a good year, I mean, he might want $40 million. And if that's the case, then I think, okay, we may be able to move on from him and go to Fields.
That's interesting because when you put it that way, and I never really thought about it that way, if you have Russell Wilson coming off of a good year where he's asking for top dollar, and when he asked for top dollar and Justin Fields, let's say he didn't play, assuming, that was your projection there, you think Russell Wilson, barring injury, is going to start all 18 weeks, which is great. The Steelers might say, look, Justin Fields did nothing. So who's going to want Justin Fields now? We've seen him at practice. We had the first glimpse of him in training camp and all throughout our OTAs and minicamp. And then, all the practices, everything. They would be able to say, Russell wants $40 million, like you just put. We're not going to pay you that, Russ, but Justin Fields will give you a deal that might be very attractive. I guess a lot of that would depend on Justin Fields. You've probably done some research on Fields. What do you think about him as a prospective quarterback for the future? Does he have what it takes, or are some of his weaknesses a little too glaring for you?
I kind of put him in that same vein as Russ. Not the accomplishments he's had, but he's dropped into a perfect system for him.
Yeah.
I don't think he was put in a position for success in Chicago. I mean, he barely had any talent around him. His coordinator wasn't good his first couple of years. He just wasn't in a good position. And you put him in Pittsburgh, where I know his turnovers were, I guess, the biggest issue that people saw with him coming in. But when we look at what Kenny Pickett, his first couple of starts, I mean, he was throwing picks all over the place, and they reeled him in, calmed him down, and settled him down, where he was able to play smart football and conservative. It's probably not what we're looking for, but he was smarter. I think they could do similar things with Justin Fields. I know Arthur Smith isn't a quarterback guru, but he knows how to put his quarterback in great situations.
You talk about the conservative nature of Kenny Pickett right after the bye week, his rookie season in 2022. I think maybe some would say he was too conservative. I mean, it was to the point where he was so afraid to throw it into one of those questionable areas, where that's eventually what ended up, I think, dooming him in Pittsburgh was that he became so conservative and maybe so concerned about turnovers. Let's hope that with Arthur Smith at the helm, that's not the case. Now, I want you to think about the Steelers. Let's just do offense first. I want you to think about offense, and I want you to think about a player that maybe a lot of fans aren't thinking about, that is a sleeper pick to have a great season, to really ball out in 2024. If you were to just think about the offense first, we'll go to defense next. Is there a player that sticks out to you that you're like, you know what? No one's really talking about this guy, but I think he could have one hell of a season this year if everything goes according to plan with Arthur Smith, quarterback situation, et cetera. Do you have someone on the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I would say Pat Freiermuth.
Okay.
And he's going to have it. I think he's going to have a huge year. Yeah, I think he'll have a huge year. Smith loves to throw to his tight ends. We're going to have to get him to work the middle of the field a little more than he has in the past. But especially with our receiver position the way it is, I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. But they might be looking at Freiermuth as almost their number 2 option at this moment. So I think Freiermuth will have a huge role in this offense.
You think Freiermuth's a good enough route runner to do that? Because I think that when everyone says, this is like your Travis Kelce type. Travis Kelce's a really good route runner. He really does read defense as well. He knows exactly what to do. And he and Patrick Mahomes are on a different level. It's almost like a Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown-esque. They see things differently and they just know where the other is going to be. Do you think that Pat Freiermuth has what it takes to get to that level?
Now, if I put my GM hat back on, I would definitely bring in another high level receiver. I wouldn't go high as like a Ayuk or somebody like that, but another solid receiver to take that pressure off of somebody like Freiermuth.
Okay.
But I definitely think he can be very productive, like that next tier type tight end. We saw what he did in Cincinnati. He went off that first game. We didn't have back in as our coordinator. So I think he's capable, not to the level as a Kelce or a Kittle or something like that, but he's somebody that can have, I say 800 yards, 7-8 touchdowns on the season.
Absolutely. I think you're right there. What about defense? Is there someone on the defensive side of the ball, again, no one's really talking about, that you're thinking, man, I think this guy in this system with the people around him could really play well? Who is that player?
One of our newest additions is Patrick Queen. I think the way our defense is set up, I think they're going to allow him to fly around, especially some of the players we brought in. And you have, hopefully, Minka can be back to that role that he excels in as roving a deep middle. And quarterbacks have to hold the ball a little longer. We see we have a star in Joey Porter Jr., and hopefully Dante Jackson will be better than our corners were last year.
Yeah.
That just going to fly around the ball. He's one of those see ball, hit ball type players. I say he's similar to how Quan Alexander was. He's just a much better.
Yeah, so let's go to a player, and I'm not sure, maybe you haven't done a lot of homework on free agent acquisition, Deshaun Elliott. That's the name that I think of when I think of a player who no one's really talking about. Patrick Queen, that's a good answer. I think that absolutely he's getting a lot of pub because obviously he's a big name guy, played for the Ravens. He's saying all the right things in the press conferences and things like that. But for me, it's Deshaun Elliott. How are they going to use this guy? Are they going to have him primarily in the slot? Is that going to allow him to be in the box more, to allow Minkah Fitzpatrick to be more of the roamer in the back end? What's your take on that signing of Elliott?
I love it because, like I said, he'll allow Minka to get away from the line of scrimmage a little more. I think it was an interview with Missy Matthews when he was first brought over, and she asked him, where does he want to play? And he said, it doesn't matter, but he wants to be around the line of scrimmage. So he's somebody that wants to be in the box. He wants to hit. He wants to play downhill. And he's kind of like how maybe what we envisioned Edmonds being a few years ago, is that bigger safety, bigger box safety.
Yeah, I think that, honestly, when I think of what they want Deshaun Elliott to be, it's what they wanted Keanu Neal to be, but Keanu Neal couldn't cover. He couldn't cover. So if you have someone that can play the box, Keanu Neal did a good job with that. He could play the run. He was like he actually played linebacker in the league, I think, with Dallas at one point. If they can have him do that, but also be able to cover, that's where they can really win in terms of maximizing potentials, maximizing matchups. Deshaun Elliott is someone to keep your eye on, I think. Now, you mentioned wide receiver. And if you were to put your GM hat on, you were to go to get another wide receiver too. Now, you also said that you weren't about to sell the farm. So that eliminates, like you said, Brandon Ayuk, the Deebo Samuels. Is there anyone out there that you're like, I could see this trade happening, and I don't think it's going to cost the Steelers a ton? Do you have any players, and it can be more than one, in mind that would fit that bill?
I'm still on Cortland Sutton. I think he
Really?
would. I think he would fit perfect. I think he'll be a high price receiver, but he's not going to break the bank like these other receivers would. We freed up some cap room, so we have space. The Cam Hayward is looking, so there'll be more room there. So Cortland Sutton is probably the biggest name that I will go after.
Some people said that they felt that he was too similar to George Pickens, that their skill sets were too similar, which I don't see a problem with that, especially when you've already signed seemingly 50,000 of the same type of slot receiver, of these small shifty players, whether it's Quez Watkins, Calvin Austin III, Scotty Miller, and you could even throw Roman Wilson in there. They literally have a plethora of these type of players. I don't see the issue of Cortland Sutton being of a similar ilk to George Pickens. Does that bother you at all, or are you not? You don't care about that stuff?
No, I agree with you. I don't see the issue in it. I mean, if you have those two guys on the outside, you still have Firemouth that's in line on the slot, and you have Roman Wilson. Those two can work the middle of the field. I mean, you can pick your poison. You throw it up to either side.
Yeah.
So I don't see that being an issue with them two being similar.
Now let's go to the other side of the ball. There is a hole still on the roster there as well at cornerback. You said Dante Jackson. You're hoping that he plays well. I am too. I don't think that they should be settled at cornerback based on the fact that, if you're banking on Corey Trice to stay healthy, well, that's a big ask because he had a big injury in college, another injury in training camp last year. I don't even think he got to training camp actually. So is there anyone out there that you would, maybe they're a free agent that you would like to have the Steelers show interest in?
I like Stephon Gilmore or a Xavier Howard, and that's
Okay.
part of the reason why I wouldn't want to sign one of those big receivers to have room. Maybe they'll double up on like Sutton and Xavier Howard or somebody like that. And then you also have, we don't know what Cam Sutton's situation is. He's somebody that's hanging around out there also.
So if they were to get Cortland Sutton, let's say they sign Stephon Gilmore, and that's it. You think that addressed the needs enough that you're like, all right, let's roll. 2024 roster is pretty much set.
I will still be worried about that slot. I mean,
Okay.
right now it looks like, I don't know if Beanie Bishop is the leading person that's playing that slot right now.
Chandon
And
Sullivan, he's still out there. So he does have the experience. Elijah Riley's still a free agent. He's had some experience in that role as well. He's not really a corner. He's more of a safety. But no, I mean, you're at the bottom of the barrel now. So you're still going to be concerned about the slot.
Yes. And like you said, Chandon Sullivan is somebody I would bring back in because he's somebody that we didn't talk about a lot last year. And that's a good thing. That means he wasn't on the field making mistakes.
Put that GM hat on again and ask yourself, what would it take with Cam Sutton? Like, what's the concerns? Obviously, the league's going to probably levy a suspension of some kind, whether his, the charges against him were lessened to a misdemeanor or not. He was a fugitive of the law basically for almost like a month. I mean, the league's probably going to come down. What are you thinking about that? Like, how would you handle that?
I mean, if he's somebody that his suspension, maybe if they give him 2 games or something like that, that means the league didn't deem it as detrimental as I guess it was first made out to be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, where nobody's advocating what he did, everybody's against what happened. But if he, I guess he did the time made up for his mistakes, then he's somebody that I'd be okay with bringing in.
Do you think Patrick Peterson in the slot could work?
I do, but I definitely feel like he's on the other end of his.
Yes.
He's on the definitely on the downside of his career, and he's limited to only the slot. You can't put him back outside. And we've seen that he's not physical enough to play safety, and that's another issue. Is he physical enough to play in the slot? He would have to be one of those slot corners that's only in on passing downs. He obviously wouldn't be in a big nickel situation, so he'll be very limited to when he's on the field.
And that's why I think it comes down to how much it would cost. Because ultimately, if Deshaun Elliott is your big nickel guy, because he's going to be the larger player, he can cover tight ends, he can still play the box and tackle, you're only going to want someone for a very temporary role. That's a very specific role. Cam Sutton mastered that role before he went to Detroit in his first contract with the Steelers when they drafted him out of Tennessee. And then they haven't been able to fill that. They haven't filled that spot since. I do feel like with Deshaun Elliott, and a mixture of an aging Patrick Peterson, if he agrees to and doesn't cost that much money, that could be a fit. I do think that could be a fit. That's just my own thinking. And yes, sometimes I look at the world through black and gold glasses. So you got to take that into consideration as well. All right, let's finish this up before I have a couple questions for you about your personal life. No, not like that. Let's ask you, okay, if the over-under win total for this year, I saw 8.5 was the line, which stunned me. But nonetheless, this was a 10-win team last year. How do you think this team's going to play?
I will still pick the over. I mean, I see our schedule is, but on paper, it's a lot tougher than it was last year. I can see them still having that same 10 wins, but being a much better team. But also those 10 job games against the Patriots, the Cardinals, and the Colts, which are 3 games we should have won. So, I mean, the way our team played, after we feel like, I mean, your record is your record, but I feel we were a win team last year. So
Yeah.
I would definitely push the over.
I would hammer the over as well, because if Mike Tomlin started saying anything, hey, if you're a bettor, okay, so you're just betting money, you know that Mike Tomlin's going to get to
Mm-hmm.
around 9 wins. Okay, that's just
Yep,
what he does.
that's his
He
floor.
could that's his floor. So if the line's at 8.5, I'm hammering the over, because even if they were to have an injury at quarterback, I think Justin Fields could still win them games. I think their depth there is much better than what it was a year ago. I think that the roster overall is a lot better than a year ago. So for bettors out there that are like, I don't know which way to hedge on the over, definitely not the under. 8.5, I think, is a really low line. If I were setting the line, I'd probably lean towards 9.5. I think that's a
I would
much more
also.
difficult line there. And that would be tough, but I still think they're over there too. I think they're a 10-win team again.
I agree. Yeah, I would set the line at 9.5 also. I feel like that's a perfect spot.
Yeah. Now, this past weekend was Mother's Day. You have a child, correct?
Yes, I do.
I want to ask, how are you raising them with the black and gold? Is this a torn house between you and your wife, or are you guys both Steelers fans? How's this playing out for you?
So my wife is a converted Steelers fan now.
Nice.
So she lived in Louisiana for a little while, so she was a Saints fan.
Okay.
Her 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 stepfather is a huge Cowboys fan, so we had to pull her away from them. So yes, my wife is a Steelers fan. My daughter will know nothing but the Steelers. I will
There
not
you
let her
go.
touch anything Cowboys or Saints. She runs around with her terrible towel now. She's 18 months and she runs around with her terrible towel now. She'll try to sing "Here We Go," and she loves it.
That's awesome. It's funny. People would always say to me when we have 5 children. My oldest is 15 now. My youngest is 5. She'll be 6 in June, and they'll say, you're brainwashing your kids, and I'm like, yes, I know. Like
Yes.
that's Operation Steelers is in full effect right now. Like they don't know anything else, and it was to the point where we would go to the grocery store, and I live in Maryland, so you can only imagine the fans that we see there.
Oh wow.
There's a lot of Washington gear, a lot of Baltimore gear, and my kids would like audibly like boo at these people. And I'm like, all right, I
Well,
do
you're
like.
raising them right.
I mean, I'm telling like I do love the fact that you're this passionate, but we also can't be like this in public. Like we got to calm it down a little bit. But even the last few years, as they got old enough, like around the 8 to 10 years old, I just kind of like backed off a little bit and said, I want to let them choose on their own. And they just naturally gravitated to what I want to do. And so your daughter's really young. There's nothing better than when your kids choose to sit down and watch a game with you.
Oh
And that's
yes.
like they could do other stuff. Like they could be out with friends. They could be in the neighborhood playing. And they're like, no, I'm going to watch a game with my dad. And that happened like the first time the last 2 years, and that's been really special. But man,
I can
you got
imagine when that day comes.
you've got some great days ahead of you. Your daughter's still young, and if she's already twirling that terrible towel, you're raising her right, man. So hey, I want to give you an opportunity to plug social media, anything else you have going on. Obviously, you're writing for the steelcurtainnetwork.com. Go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and plug what you're doing.
Yeah, so my Twitter or X account is cgillis2021. I have a YouTube page at Chris G _Steelers. That's where I put a lot of my content where you can see me and not just read my words.
Yeah.
I started a Black and Gold fan show. You can find that on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's also my YouTube page.
Awesome. Fantastic work, man. I appreciate you taking the time. It was good to put a face with a name because we've communicated so often. And I do appreciate all the work that you've done for the Steel Curtain Network. I think bigger things ahead, man. And I appreciate all your hard work. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Oh man, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everything you do. I mean, you make it easy being a Steelers fan, especially I live down here in Texas, so sometimes it's a little harder to get
Yeah.
content. So it works out great.
The labor of love, man. I enjoy it. I'm glad you enjoy it too. Yeah, Steel Curtain Network. Check it out. Chris, thanks again. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.